In January 2026, Michael J. Fox did something many fans thought they might never see again. He returned to acting. In the third season of Apple TV's Shrinking, Fox appeared opposite Harrison Ford as Jerry, a man living with Parkinson's disease. The shaking was not hidden. The changes in his voice were not written around. This time, the performance did not ask his body to pretend. That matters, because pretending had once been part of the job. Fox was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 1991, when he was only 29 years old. For the next 7 years, he kept it from the public while continuing to work and protect a fast, funny, endlessly energetic image America loved. The world still saw Alex P. Keaton. It still saw Marty McFly racing through time. It did not see the clock that had started moving inside his own body. So why did he come back now? What did 7 years of secrecy cost him? And why does this return feel less like a comeback than the first time a fictional role has been allowed to meet him exactly where his life is now? To understand that decision, we have to go back to Canada, to a restless kid in a military family who was always moving, always adapting, and already looking for the one thing that felt like his own. Michael Andrew Fox was born on June 9, 1961, in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. He was the fifth of 6 children. His father, Bill Fox, served in the Royal Canadian Corps Signals. His mother, Phyllis, worked as a payroll clerk and had done some acting. It was a military family, which meant it was a moving family. Bases changed. Towns changed. The address on the envelope kept changing. Fox would later describe himself as an army brat, and the phrase carries more than it seems to. It means a childhood spent arriving somewhere, learning the shape of it, and then leaving before the shape became home. A kid who grows up that way tends to develop certain habits. You get good at reading a new room fast. You get good at adapting, because the alternative is being the outsider in every town. You learn that the people and places around you are temporary, and that whatever you carry from one move to the next has to be carried inside you. None of this is unusual for a military family. But in Fox's case, it produced a specific combination: restlessness and a talent for making people pay attention. In 1971, his father retired from the military, and the family finally settled in Burnaby, British Columbia. This was the closest thing to a fixed point that Fox's childhood had. A real town, a real school. He was small for his age. He would stay small, topping out well under average height, quick with a joke, and not especially interested in what school wanted him to be interested in. He played hockey. He thought, for a while, that he might want to be a musician. He was the kind of kid who could disappear into the back of a classroom or take over front of it, depending on what the moment called for. What the moment eventually called for was a stage. In junior high, Fox joined the drama club, and a teacher there encouraged him to audition for a new CBC series called Leo and Me. He got the part. He was 16. The set was not glamorous Hollywood. It was Canadian television. Smaller crews, tighter budgets, ordinary corridors, cables on the floor, adults moving quickly because there was never enough time. But to Fox, it was a doorway. For the first time, the quickness that sometimes made him difficult in a classroom had a practical use. He could hit a mark, catch a rhythm, make a line land, and feel a room turn toward him. Acting was a place where becoming someone new was not a survival skill. It was the actual job. He was good at it almost immediately. More important, he recognized the feeling. A stage or a set gave him something the moving houses and new schools never had. A place where the uncertainty was planned, where everyone knew the scene would change, and where adaptation was rewarded instead of merely required. He kept working in Vancouver. Local television, local theater, the small, steady jobs of a regional industry that does not make stars, but does make working actors. Michael J. Fox was never an overnight discovery. He was a teenager grinding through the lower rungs of a working business, learning the craft the way you learn a trade, one job at a time. And then at 17, he made the decision that defines the first half of his life. He dropped out of school and moved to Los Angeles to become an actor. Not someday. Not after college. Now. He was a Canadian teenager with some local credits and no guarantees, walking into the most competitive entertainment market on earth. There's a small detail from those early Los Angeles days that says almost everything about him. When Fox went to join the Screen Actors Guild, he discovered there was already an actor registered as Michael Fox. He could not use his own name, so he needed a middle initial, and he chose J, a quiet tribute to a character actor he admired named Michael J. Pollard. Before he had done anything, before anyone knew his name, he had to rebuild the name itself. The boy who had spent his childhood adapting to new towns now had to adapt his own identity just to get in the door. He did it without complaint. Whatever the situation required, Fox would become it. What he did not know was that Los Angeles was about to make him wait. Los Angeles did not hand Michael J. Fox a career. For the first few years, it nearly broke him. He arrived around 1979 with local Canadian credits that meant almost nothing in Hollywood. The work was small and irregular. The money was worse. The apartment did not become a romantic artist's hideaway. It became a place where objects slowly disappeared because objects could be turned into rent. A chair went. A table went. Whatever could be sold bought a little more time. Meals became cheaper and smaller, the kind of food chosen because it filled space rather than because anyone wanted it. Hollywood was only a few miles away, but fame might as well have been on another continent. This is the part later success tends to clean up. The young actor is remembered as determined, as if determination made the room warmer or the refrigerator fuller. It did not. There were auditions that led nowhere, calls that did not come, and days when the one useful thing he could do was keep the phone connected and show up again. The confident speed that had carried him out of Canada had run into something it had not met before, a city that did not care how quick he was. This is a part of the story that gets lost in the later fame, and it matters because it means the success that came next was not inevitable. He came close to failing entirely. He was nearly out of money and nearly out of road when the thing finally turned. In 1982, he got the role that changed everything. The show was Family Ties, an NBC sitcom about a pair of former hippie parents raising children in the Reagan era. Fox played Alex P. Keaton, conservative, money-minded, briefcase-carrying teenage son, a character who could have been insufferable in lesser hands. Fox made him beloved. He gave Alex a speed and a charm that made the ambition funny instead of cold. Audiences did not just tolerate Alex P. Keaton. They loved him. The show became one of the top comedies on American television. Fox won 3 primetime Emmys for it and a Golden Globe. But even the casting had carried a warning. NBC executive Brandon Tartikoff was famously skeptical that someone so small could become a leading man. Fox later turned that doubt into a private joke, reportedly giving Tartikoff a framed lunchbox with his picture on it after the success arrived. The gesture was funny, but the memory underneath it was real. Hollywood had looked at him and seen a limitation before audiences looked at him and saw a star. He was in his early 20s, and the bet he had made at 17 had finally paid off. But television was not the thing that turned Michael J. Fox into a cultural symbol. That was Back to the Future. The story of how he got the role is one of the strangest in Hollywood history. The film had already begun shooting with a different actor. Eric Stoltz had been cast as Marty McFly and had filmed for several weeks before the director, Robert Zemeckis, decided it was not working. He wanted Fox. The problem was that Fox was still shooting Family Ties full-time. So a deal was made that bordered on impossible. Fox would film the sitcom during the day and the movie at night, sleeping in whatever hours were left. The recasting cost the production an estimated $3.5 to $4 million and 34 shooting days. They threw all of it away and started over, because the studio believed the specific actor was worth it. There was no rehearsal period to ease into the biggest opportunity of his life. According to him, he essentially walked straight onto the set. He has described his first impression of it: a parking lot in City of Industry, California, lit up so bright in the middle of the night that it looked like daytime. He stood there and understood that this was something much bigger than the sitcom he had just left. And then there was the car, the DeLorean, the stainless steel time machine with the gull-wing doors that would become one of the most recognizable objects in movie history. Fox has said that the moment he got into it, he felt comfortable. That is a strange thing to say about a prop, but it tells you something. The DeLorean became the most stable object in his public image, the thing that fixed him forever in the audience's mind as a boy who could move through time. Back to the Future opened on July 3rd, 1985. It was the #1 film of the year. In its first 12 weeks in theaters, it sat at the top of the North American box office for 11 of them. It made Michael J. Fox a global phenomenon. He was no longer the kid from a Canadian military family who had nearly gone broke in Los Angeles. He was Marty McFly, the face of speed, of youth, of quick reflexes and quicker comebacks. These were the brightest years. He was working at a pace almost no actor sustains, a hit television series and a blockbuster film franchise at the same time. He was young, famous, wealthy, and adored. The restlessness that had carried him out of Canada now had everything it could possibly want. And no one watching had any reason to think about his body. Why would they? His timing was perfect. His reflexes were perfect. He was 24 years old, and he moved like the future belonged to him. The clock inside his body had not started ticking loudly yet, but it was already there. In 1991, Michael J. Fox was 29 years old, and by every external measure, he had everything. He was one of the most famous young actors in the world. He was married. He had a young son. He was working constantly. The kid who had nearly gone broke in Los Angeles a decade earlier had outrun every expectation, and he had done it fast, the way he did everything. He was on location shooting a film called Doc Hollywood when he first noticed it. His left pinky finger was twitching. Just the little finger. A small, involuntary movement that would not stop. His first instinct was that it was nothing, a trapped nerve, too much work. There was also a pain in his shoulder, which he assumed he had injured. The body of a man in his late 20s does not, in his own imagination, contain anything serious. He went to a neurologist. The word that came back was Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's is most commonly diagnosed later in adulthood. It can gradually affect movement, balance, speech, sleep, mood, and the small automatic actions people never notice until those actions stop being automatic. Michael J. Fox was 29. He had a wife, a toddler, a face recognized around the world, and a career built on the speed of his body. The diagnosis did not arrive as a dramatic collapse. It arrived through one finger that would not stay still, a quiet symptom carrying a future too large to absorb in a single appointment. He sought more answers because the first answer felt impossible. A young actor at the height of his career did not fit the picture most people carried of Parkinson's. But another opinion did not return him to the life he had expected. The word remained. The practical questions followed. How long could he work? Who had to know? What would happen when the camera saw it? And how do you tell your wife that the future the two of you had just begun to build has changed before either of you has learned how to name the change? The doctors told him he had young-onset Parkinson's, the future he had been racing toward, the one where his quick body and perfect timing carried him through decade after decade, was rewritten in a single appointment. The instrument that had made his entire career possible was going to slowly stop doing what he asked of it, and his response to that defines the next 7 years of his life. He told almost no one. He kept it from the public completely. From 1991 to 1998, the world had no idea. He kept working through films such as For Love or Money, Life with Mikey, The Frighteners, and later Spin City. Posters still showed the familiar grin. Interviews still sold the familiar energy. On screen, he remained a man who could talk quickly, move quickly, and rescue a scene before anyone else had caught up. Off-screen, he was learning that every workday now had a hidden schedule inside the official one. The rise and fall of medication, the angle of a hand, the position of a chair, the distance between a symptom and the next close-up. To do that, he built a system of concealment. He learned to time his medication so that the moments his symptoms were most controlled lined up with the moments the camera was on him. He held things, props, the edge of a table, to keep a trembling hand still or out of frame. He learned which side of his body to turn toward the lens. An actor whose gift had always been instinctive, effortless movement was now spending enormous energy on a second, hidden performance, the performance of being fine. Every day on set, he was doing two jobs. One was the role he was paid to play. The other was the role of a healthy man, performed for everyone around him with no breaks and no applause, because the entire point was that no one knew it was a performance at all. He later explained why he hid it, and the reason was not vanity. It was shame. There's such shame associated with this illness, he said. He was not protecting a brand. He was hiding something he had been made to feel was a weakness, a defect, a thing that would change how people looked at him. In an industry built entirely on how people look at you, that fear was not irrational. So he carried it alone. The habit looked familiar. Adapt quickly, keep moving, handle it himself before anyone could see the cost. It was the same approach that had gotten him through every new town and every closed door. Except this time, the thing he was adapting around was not a town he could leave or a role he could land. It was in his own hand, his own arm, his own body. The one place he could not move away from. For 7 years, his answer was to keep moving anyway, and to make sure the cameras never saw the clock. The hardest part of those 7 years was not the acting. It was what happened when the cameras turned off. To understand it, you have to go back to the person standing closest to him through all of it. Michael J. Fox met Tracy Pollan in 1985 on the set of Family Ties, where she played his girlfriend Ellen. They did not fall in love then. Both were involved with other people, and the working relationship stayed a working relationship. It was 2 years later, in 1987, when they were cast together again in a film called Bright Lights, Big City, that something shifted. This time it was real. They married on July 16, 1988, at an inn in Arlington, Vermont. That date matters because it is before the diagnosis. Tracy Pollan did not marry a man with Parkinson's disease. She married a fast, funny, healthy 27-year-old at the peak of his fame. Their first child, Sam, was born in 1989. The diagnosis came in 1991. The disease did not enter a marriage prepared for it. It arrived into a young family that had every reason to believe the future was wide open. And Fox's first instinct was to manage it the way he managed everything. Alone. Quietly. That instinct had a cost the public never saw. He began to drink. Not in the cartoonish, dramatic way movies depict, but in the quieter, more dangerous way, alone at the end of the day, as a way of not feeling something he had no other way to handle. The man who had spent his whole life moving fast enough to stay ahead of things had finally hit a thing he could not move away from. And for a while, he reached for something that made the awareness of it go quiet. The turning point came through Tracy. There was a moment when she found him in a state that made the problem impossible to keep hiding from her, and she asked him one question that cut through everything. The essence of it was simple. Is this what you want? She did not save him the way a character in a movie saves someone. What she did was make it much harder for him to keep pretending the drinking was helping, and harder to keep managing the secret alone inside his own home. She would not let the private performance continue in front of her. He got sober in 1992, and he has stayed sober since. Sobriety did not make the diagnosis easier. It removed the fog that had allowed him to postpone feeling it. That meant mornings became clearer, but so did fear. It meant coming home without the private anesthetic and sitting at a table with the people whose future was tied to his. It meant Tracy did not need a speech about courage. She needed a husband who was present. Their marriage would not become a perfect inspirational picture. It became something more durable, a long practice of humor, irritation, honesty, children, work, medicine, and ordinary days that refused to organize themselves entirely around a disease. What changed was not the disease. You cannot beat Parkinson's. What changed was the strategy. For most of his life, he had survived by adapting alone, moving fast, handling things himself before anyone saw the cost. Getting sober was the first time he allowed the opposite. The first time he let the people who loved him into the actual situation, instead of performing a managed version of it for them. But the public performance continued. He still had not told the world, and his career was not slowing down. By the mid-1990s, he wanted a way to work that would keep him closer to his family, Tracy, Sam, and the twin daughters, Aquina and Skylar, who arrived in 1995. So in 1996, he returned to television in Spin City, playing a deputy mayor in New York. It was shot near home. It let him be a father in a way the film schedule never had. Sam was old enough to recognize that his father belonged to strangers as well as to the family. The twins, Aquina and Skylar, were still small. Their youngest daughter, Esme, would arrive in 2001, after the public disclosure and after Fox had begun rebuilding his public life around the disease. The children grew up not in a house where Parkinson's was absent, but in one where it was not allowed to become the only subject in the room. It also let him keep hiding from the public for a while longer. But Parkinson's does not negotiate. The symptoms were getting harder to conceal. The medication timing, the props, the careful choreography of stillness, all of it was reaching its limit. By the third season of Spin City, he understood he could not keep doing this. The hidden performance had an expiration date, and he had reached it. In 1998, Michael J. Fox told the world he had Parkinson's disease. 7 years after the diagnosis. 7 years of medication, timing, and props, and turned shoulders, and the daily, exhausting performance of being fine. From the outside, it looked like a vulnerable celebrity finally admitting something sad. But for Fox, after 7 years of concealment, telling the truth was the first time he stopped running. It was the first time he let the world see the actual situation instead of the managed version. He did not yet know what he was going to do with that, but he had stopped hiding it, and that turned out to change everything. For 7 years, Michael J. Fox had treated his disease as a private problem to hide. In 2000, he did the opposite. He built a public institution out of it. When he went public in 1998, he could have done what many public figures do with an illness, made a graceful statement, accepted the sympathy, and quietly retreated to manage things in private. Instead, he turned the other direction. By 2000, he had decided to step back from full-time acting on Spin City, not to disappear, but to redirect everything. That fall, he launched the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research. What was radical about that move is easy to miss. Fox could not control the disease in his own body. That fight was lost the moment the neurologist said the word. The progression would continue regardless of how famous he was, how much money he had, how hard he worked. For a man whose entire life had been built on the belief that speed and effort could outrun any problem, this was the one situation that did not respond to any of it. So, he changed the target. He could not change the clock inside his body, but he could try to change the clock for the disease itself, the timeline of the research, the speed at which science moved toward a cure. That was a thing that could, in theory, be accelerated with money, with pressure, with attention, with the one resource he had an enormous supply, the ability to make the world pay attention to him. He took the fame he had once used to hide the disease and aimed it directly at the disease. The foundation was built around a deliberately ruthless idea. It was not designed to last forever, to become a comfortable institution, raising money year after year. Fox stated the goal plainly. We're in business to go out of business. The point was to fund the research that would make the foundation unnecessary, to put itself out of a job by solving the problem it existed to solve. The numbers are not small. Over the years that followed, the Michael J. Fox Foundation became the largest nonprofit funder of Parkinson's research in the world, raising more than $2.5 billion to advance it. That is not a celebrity lending his name to a cause and showing up for an annual gala. That is a man who restructured his entire public life around a scientific problem. And he did not just raise money. He pushed the science. The foundation became known for funding the unglamorous, essential work, the search for biomarkers that would let researchers measure disease, compare patients over time, and test whether a treatment was truly changing what happened inside the body. One of its largest efforts was the Parkinson's Progression Markers Initiative, launched in 2010. To a television audience, what PPMI does is not dramatic. It follows thousands of volunteers across 50 clinical sites in 12 countries, collecting scans, blood samples, spinal fluid, and years of clinical data, ordinary objects, stored in ordinary facilities, generating ordinary spreadsheets. To researchers, those ordinary objects are the raw material of a breakthrough, because without them, no one can measure whether a treatment is actually changing what happens inside the body. In April 2023, PPMI delivered what decades of Parkinson's research had been waiting for. A study published in the Lancet Neurology analyzed samples from more than 1,100 PPMI participants and confirmed that a specialized laboratory test could detect misfolded alpha-synuclein, a protein closely tied to Parkinson's, in the spinal fluid of people living with the disease, with 88% sensitivity and 96% specificity. More importantly, it could detect the protein in people who had not yet developed visible symptoms. That may sound technical. Here is what it means in plain language. For more than 200 years, since James Parkinson first described the disease in 1817, there was no objective test for it. Diagnosis depended entirely on a doctor watching a patient's body, observing tremor, slowness, stiffness, and making a judgment. The only way to confirm the biological presence of the disease was autopsy. This test changed that. For the first time, the biology of Parkinson's could be identified in a living person. It was not a cure, and the Foundation did not pretend it was. The test currently requires a spinal fluid sample, which means it is a research and clinical trial tool, not yet a routine screening test. But it offered something the field had never had before, a biological signal that does not depend on waiting for a finger to twitch or a hand to shake. Fox, writing about it afterward, said he had spent years feeling a little left behind in biology's century. Not anymore. His public story had begun with one twitching pinky finger in 1991. The science he helped fund was now trying to detect the disease before a finger had to tell the story at all. He learned enough of the science to talk to researchers as a serious partner, not simply a patron. He testified before Congress. He asked why promising work was moving slowly and why patients had to wait. He became one of the most visible and influential patient advocates of his generation. There is a better phrase for what he became than celebrity with an illness. He became a translator. He stood between a world of patients, frightened, often silent, and the world of science, which moves slowly and speaks a language most people cannot follow. He uses fame to connect those two worlds and speed up the traffic between them. By 2023, the recognition for that work had reached a level that had nothing to do with acting. He received an Elevate Prize Catalyst Award, which came with $250,000. He had long since stopped being a movie star who happened to get sick. He had become the figure institutions turned to when they wanted to understand what real patient advocacy looked like. Underneath all of it was the same engine that had always driven him: speed, urgency, the refusal to wait. Except now it was pointed at something larger than his own career. He talks about the research with the same restless energy he once brought to a film set, as a man who knows exactly what clock he is racing and exactly who is counting on it. Because here is what the foundation was really about. Fox could not get his own time back. The diagnosis was permanent. There was no clever fix that would let him return to 1991 and change the outcome. And he, of all people, knew that because he had spent his youth playing exactly the kind of character who could. But he could try to make sure the people diagnosed after him would have more time than he did. Better treatments. Maybe someday a cure. He took his private, unwinnable race against the clock and turned it into a public one that millions of strangers were now running alongside him. That is the thing that separates him from a sad story. He did not beat his disease. He did something stranger and more useful. He took the one thing it could not touch, his ability to make the world pay attention, and spent it on everyone who would come after him. So go back and watch Back to the Future again, because it does not look the same anymore. In 1985, audiences saw a comedy about a teenager who travels through time. Marty McFly climbs into a DeLorean, gets thrown back to 1955, and has to race against the clock to fix the timeline before he disappears. The entire engine of the film is speed and control. Marty is always running, always calculating, always one quick move from disaster. And he always makes the move. He gets back. He fixes it. He returns to a present better than the one he left. Fox sold that fantasy perfectly because his body could do anything the role required. The skateboard chases, the physical comedy, the split-second timing. The performance worked because the instrument was flawless. And the instrument was flawless because he was 24 and at the absolute peak of what a body can do. Watch it now. Know what was coming, and a quiet ache runs under every frame. Here's a young man whose entire screen identity was built on the idea that you can outrun time, that if you are quick enough and clever enough, you can go back and undo what went wrong. And he is playing that fantasy 6 years before a doctor tells him the one clock he can never beat has already started ticking inside his own body. There is no DeLorean for Parkinson's. There is no going back to 1991. The disease moves in one direction only, forward, which is the exact opposite of the power Marty McFly had. Fox has made his peace with that irony, and characteristically, he made it funny. He has talked about watching the film on Christmas Eve, eating popcorn, looking at his 24-year-old self race across the screen. His comment was not mournful. It was, "I'm good in it." That lightness is easy to misread. It would be easy to hear, "I'm good in it," as a man brushing past pain. It is the opposite. It is a man who knows exactly what he is looking at, his own lost speed, frozen forever on film, and has decided not to make everyone around him sit in the sadness of it. The joke is not denial. It is generosity. It is him taking care of the room, the way he always has. And then there is what he did with the time machine itself. In October 2025, Fox published a book called Future Boy, Back to the Future and My Journey Through the Space-Time Continuum. At 64, more than 30 years into a disease that took away the very quickness that made Marty McFly possible, he was still claiming the identity of the time traveler, still using the language of the space-time continuum to describe his own life. This is not a man trapped by his most famous role. This is a man who took it back. For decades, Marty McFly was a thing that happened to him, a younger self he could never live up to again. By writing Future Boy, he absorbed it instead. He could not fix his own timeline the way Marty fixed his. but he could decide what the story of that timeline meant. The DeLorean only ever went two directions, backward to undo or forward to escape. Fox found a third one. He stayed exactly where he was, in the time he actually had, and decided what to do with it. The boy who sold the world the fantasy of beating the clock grew into the man who showed it the harder, truer thing. You cannot beat the clock. But you are not finished just because you cannot. The hardest chapter of his life is the one where the body started sending the bill. For Fox, it came due slowly across the 2010s, and then all at once. Parkinson's is managed, not cured. For years, he controlled his symptoms with medication. Carbidopa and levodopa, the standard treatment that helps the brain compensate for what the disease takes away. In 1998, the same year he went public, he had also undergone a procedure called a thalamotomy, aimed at reducing tremor. These were tools of management. They did not stop the disease. They bought time and function, which is all that managing progressive illness can do. But Parkinson's was not the only thing happening to his body. In 2018, Fox had spinal surgery to remove a benign tumor, a growth not related to Parkinson's, but one that threatened his ability to walk. The surgery went well. The tumor was removed. And then, during recovery, came one of the darkest stretches of the entire ordeal. He fell. He was at home, recovering, feeling good enough to think the worst was behind him, and he fell and shattered his arm. It required surgery, pins, the whole apparatus of serious break. But the physical injury was not the part that hurt most. It was what the fall did to philosophy he had built his public life around. The idea that you could find your way through this disease with the right attitude. In his book No Time Like the Future, written during this period, he put it more honestly than he ever had before. There is no way to put shine on my circumstance, as I have so many times in the past, publicly and privately. Positivism is a state of mind one achieves, and I am presently an underachiever. He has not said the optimism disappeared permanently. He has said it had to be rebuilt, and that the rebuilt version was different from the original, not simpler, harder and more specific. He came to distinguish what he actually believed from the easy version people wanted to hear. Acceptance doesn't mean resignation, he said. It means understanding that something is what it is and that there's got to be a way through it. And he landed on a phrase that became something close to a personal operating principle. Gratitude makes optimism sustainable, not the other way around. Gratitude first. Then, and only then, the willingness to look forward. What followed was a cascade. The Parkinson's affected his balance and his gait. The falls kept coming. Over the following years, he broke his arm, his hand, bones in his face. Each one was a negotiation with a body that no longer reliably did what he asked. The man who once moved with perfect instinctive grace now had to think about every step. And then the disease came for the one tool an actor cannot work without. His speech began to fail. The timing, the clarity, the breath, all governed by the same neurological process affecting his hands. For most people, that would be a difficulty. For an actor, it is, in his own word, a game breaker. You cannot deliver lines if you cannot reliably command your own voice. So in 2020, Michael J. Fox stepped back from acting for the second time. The first time, in 2000, had been a choice made from relative strength, a redirection toward the foundation. This time was different. He recognized that the work was asking for things his body and his memory could no longer reliably provide. He was honest about what the disease is. He did not dress it up. You don't die from Parkinson's, he said. You die with Parkinson's. It is one of the most clear-eyed things any public figure has said about a chronic illness. He was not promising anyone it would be beaten. He was telling the truth. This is a thing you carry, not a thing you defeat, and you carry it for as long as you live. In 2023, that honesty became a film. The documentary Still, A Michael J. Fox movie premiered at Sundance that January and arrived on Apple TV Plus in May. Fox's only instruction to director Davis Guggenheim was 2 words: no violins. Guggenheim took that seriously. He built the film without a single traditional talking head interview. Instead, it moved between family footage, carefully staged reconstructions shot from behind or from the side, because no body double could pass for Fox in front. Clips pulled from Fox's own movies and repurposed to illustrate real events, and the present-day physical reality Fox could no longer edit out. A fall was not treated as a symbol placed there by a writer. It was part of the working day. So were therapy, repetition, fatigue, and the practice humor that arrived before anyone could turn the room into a funeral. Fox approved footage of himself that was unflattering. He allowed scenes of real pain. The film went on to earn 7 Emmy nominations and win 4. Its title carried 2 meanings at once. The stillness Parkinson's, which relentless tremor never actually allowed him, and the plain fact that he was still here. He talked, around this time, about exhaustion, not ordinary tiredness, but the deep, grinding fatigue that is one of the least visible and most relentless symptoms of advanced Parkinson's. Exhaustion is my biggest issue, he said. He acknowledged using a wheelchair to get around on the days that called for it. There's a wrong way to read this chapter, and it should be named directly. The version where a beloved star is simply diminished, finished, a figure pity. That version is false. A man using a wheelchair on a hard day is not a man who cannot walk. A man whose speech is unreliable for precise demands of acting is not a man who can no longer speak. These are real limitations, and Fox has never pretended otherwise. But they are not the end of the person. They are the conditions a person now lives inside. He did not stop hiding the disease in 1998, so the world could now reduce him to it. What he had actually done, across all those falls and surgeries and losses, was learn the difference between what he could control and what he could not. He could not control the disease, but he could still control how he showed up, and he was about to make a decision about that, one that would bring the whole story back to where it started, in front of camera with nothing hidden at all. The story comes back to a camera and to a body that has stopped pretending. But first, 3 rooms. In February 2024, at the Royal Festival Hall in London, Fox came out to present the biggest prize at the BAFTA Awards, Best Film. The way he arrived told the audience everything before he spoke. He came out in a wheelchair. The room saw the wheelchair first. And then, in front of the entire hall, he stood up. It would be easy to write that as a triumphant cliche. The brave star rising from the chair, the crowd on its feet. But the power was not that he stood. It was a contrast the whole image held. Here was a man who, 40 years earlier, had been the fastest body in American movies. The kid on the skateboard, the boy who outran time. And here he was in that same body, for decades on, doing something that now took real effort and real risk, in front of everyone, hiding none of it. The room rose for him. But the real story was the audience watching both versions of the same man at once. The one who moved like the future belonged to him, and the one who now moves carefully through a present his body has reshaped. He let them see both. Less than a year later, in January 2025, he stood in another room, the White House. He received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor in the country, for the work the foundation had done. Afterward, he posted a photograph, not of himself with the president, of himself with his family, Tracy Pollan, and their 4 children, Sam, the twins Aquina and Skylar, and Esme. Consider what that photograph holds. This is the man who, in 1991, was so ashamed of his diagnosis that he hid it from nearly everyone, who drank alone because he did not know how to let anyone into the real situation, whose first instinct was always to carry it by himself. And here he was, decades later, in the most public room in America, honored by the nation, Surrounded by the family he had once tried to protect by carrying too much of the fear alone, the secret that nearly isolated him had become a thing that placed him at the center of a circle of people who loved him. He said as much around the same time at an award ceremony in 2026. Looking back on his whole career, he called Tracy Pollan the greatest gift it had given him and brought his son Sam on stage, introducing him, with the timing he has never lost, as just my date. The career gave him fame and money and a place in the culture. What he named as its greatest gift was a woman he met on a sitcom set in 1985. There was a stranger note that year, too. A news outlet mistakenly published his obituary. For most people, that would be a horror. Fox answered the way he always answers, posting 4 words. I'm okay. Love, Mike. Not angry, not wounded, just present and faintly amused the way he has been through all of it. And then there's the thing the whole story had been building toward. In January 2026, he returned to acting in Shrinking. After the second retirement, after speech and memory had made scripted work harder, after Parkinson's had changed the way he could move through a scene, he went back in front of camera. This time, the role was not built around concealing the reality of the disease. His movement, his voice, and the physical uncertainty were allowed to exist inside the performance. He played a man with Parkinson's disease, and the camera did not have to look away. Look at the full distance of that. In 1991, he had a twitching pinky finger from the world. In 2026, he sat in front of a camera and let his actual shaking become part of performance. Part of the character, part of the truth the audience was allowed to see. The concealment that had once been his second full-time job was gone. That is why it is not a comeback in the usual sense. A comeback suggests a return to the old version. The same speed, the same body, the same performance. This was something more honest. A fictional role meeting him exactly where his life was now. The young actor once known for making effort look invisible had become an older actor willing to let effort remain visible. He could not control the disease, but he could still help decide what the camera was allowed to understand about it. The boy in the 1985 movie could climb into a car and undo what went wrong. That was a fantasy, and Fox sold it because his body could do anything the story asked. He was the face of the idea that you can beat the clock. 6 years later, a doctor told him the one clock he could never beat had already started ticking inside his own body. There was no going back. No DeLorean for 1991. Parkinson's moves one direction only, forward, the exact opposite of everything Marty McFly could do. He spent 7 years hiding that. And then, across decades of falls, surgeries, work, family life, and public advocacy, he learned something he had resisted since the diagnosis. He could not control what was happening to him, but he could control what he did with the time available to him. He could not change the clock inside his body, so he went to work on the clock for everyone else. He could not undo the diagnosis, so he stopped hiding it and let his own shaking hands become the most honest thing he ever put on screen. He could not be Marty McFly, the boy who reversed time. So he became something the role never imagined, a man who stays exactly where he is in the time he actually has and decides what it will mean. That is why the return in Shrinking is the right place to end. The young man who once let the camera see only a flawless body finally let it see a real one. He stopped asking a fictional role to disguise what Parkinson's had changed. And in doing that, he gave the audience a different kind of performance, one in which the effort, the uncertainty, and the man were allowed to occupy the same frame. He never got his old body back. He never beat the disease. The story does not end with a cure, because there isn't one yet. But that was never the point of him. The point was the choice he kept making every year about what to do with the time he could not control. The boy who played a time traveler grew up to teach the rest of us the one thing the movie got wrong. You cannot go back and fix it. But you can decide what it means going forward. And that, in the end, turns out to be the only kind of time travel that was ever real. What does Michael J. Fox's story mean to you? Did you first know him as Alex P. Keaton, as Marty McFly racing through time, or as a man who turned his diagnosis into a fight for millions of others? Leave your answer in the comments. And if this story moved you, leave a like and tell us what city you are watching from tonight.